Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
It must be just terribly discouraging from the average person's viewpoint who isn't in the academic world and saying, "Well, what's going on there?"
Mm-hmm.
You know, we pay good money, tax money or whatever, to educate these youngsters, and it's not happening.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Dr. James Larson, Director of the Honors Program at the University of Toledo. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of excellence in education. Here's Father Bacik.
Jim, I've enjoyed a lot of our conversations during this past academic year. A few times at lunch when we've been able to talk seriously, and I know that you're really concerned with the quality of education at the University of Toledo, that you have a real passion for giving opportunities for students to learn and increasing the excellence of education. It's something that I know that you feel deeply. I think it's one of the things that's impressed me about you and our interactions over this year. And you do have that concern, don't you?
Indeed, I do. Yes, I'm very concerned about the state of things today. There was a recent report that was issued by the National Commission on Excellence in Education, and some of their findings are really alarming. I should say, they aren't so alarming to me as an academic administrator who's close to the problem. But I think that they are alarming to the nation at large and should be.
This report got a lot of publicity in the recent past, didn't it? I can remember the news reports, and it was in the paper and so on. How long ago, when did that come out?
It's been a couple of months. I'm not sure of its exact date.
No, but it's a 1983
Oh, yes,
report.
yeah. Within the last 2 months.
Yes.
Their most alarming finding, I think, is that students are leaving high school, in a sense, functionally illiterate. They know virtually nothing about science and technology. There are many students even who are not able to read on a high school, grade school, elementary school level even. This seems to be indicated or apparent in a shift out of two kinds of typical high school curricula and into what they call the general track. Students are leaving the college high school curriculum, the college-bound curriculum, and they're also leaving the vocational curriculums and moving into these general track courses that include things like driver's education and typing, shorthand, bachelor living, if you can believe that, cooking. Nothing wrong with all of those things. I think they're very important. But what is happening is that students are not taking courses in mathematics. They're not taking courses in foreign languages. They're not taking courses in English. They're not taking courses in the sciences, in the lab sciences or general sciences. And yet, those students are still going on to college. Many state universities have an open-door admission policy. They're required to take anyone who applies for admission. So the high school student reasons, why should I take the college curriculum in high school when I can be guaranteed of admission anyway? I'll put off my science and math and foreign languages until I get to college. It's too late then. They arrive at our doors unable to be educated at a college level. So we have to do an enormous job, often an enormous job, of remedial work. it's a very alarming situation.
It certainly is a frightening thing. It's quite amazing, isn't it, in a culture in which communications have improved so much, in which we have so many things computerized, and which I would guess that generally our health has improved, and capabilities in so many other areas. Like if you look at the area of sports, for example, you find young people doing so much better at an early age. What we know about records in track and things like that, it seems that all improves. Looking at it from the viewpoint of a baseball player, you can see how the kids at a younger age are better than they were at the past, better coaching and so on. And so in so many areas of life, it seems as though the opportunities are there, and yet we are falling behind in this whole educational endeavor. I imagine the average person just is shaking their head and saying, geez, we pour all this money into this, all this computerized technology and so on, and we're not getting our money's worth. I mean, it must be just terribly discouraging from the average person's viewpoint who isn't in the academic world and saying, hey, what's going on there? We pay good money, tax money or whatever, to educate these youngsters, and it's not happening. I guess one would have to start to look for reasons why it's not happening. Huh? I mean, it is true, isn't it? I mean, are there other things to be cited here about showing that we're failing? I mean, the SAT scores are going down. That's the test taken in order to enter into college and so on.
Yes.
There's a gradual decline in those.
Well, it's not completely accurate. This study says that the SAT scores are going down. What in fact is happening is that there is an enormous gap in the middle. There's a very small percentage, about 2 or 3%, whose SAT scores are getting higher and higher every year. Those 2 or 3% are being educated as they should be educated. The greatest majority, however, 97% of SAT scores are, and I'm not quite sure about the statistic here, but it's an enormous majority, are going down, and the middle scores, the scores in that middle range or middle to slightly above average, are empty. That's only one.
What do you mean
indicator.
they're empty?
Well, there are no students with scores in that range.
I see.
People just simply are not scoring
at
that level. It's amazing because it's been where the greatest preponderance of scores has been over the years. But it's not just the SAT score. The ACT test score is another kind of test that students all take, and it indicates the same kind of thing.
Those are tests they take in their senior year of high school?
Right, yeah. They take them as
and used by colleges and universities in terms of admissions programs.
That's right.
And so on.
Those schools that at least are selective in their admissions. As I mentioned, a great many state universities are required to take any student who applies.
What do you think about that before we get off that
subject?
That open admissions, yeah.
I think it does a disservice to the society at large. I think that, and it makes education in a university that much more difficult for us to accomplish as faculty and administrators. It means, as I said earlier, we have to do an enormous remedial job, and we take up our time with that when we are trying, in fact, to push people up to their capacity, beyond where they arrive, where we find them. So these reports show over and over again that the average graduate of schools and colleges today is not as well educated as the average graduate of 25 or 35 years ago. Now that's the first time in the history of our country that has happened, that the first time that the generation that is graduating from college today has not surpassed the preceding generation. We've always, it's just been a part of our definition as Americans to go always beyond the generation that we have come from. Now, for the first time,
that's not
our parents are going to
no.
be better educated than we were.
You know, I think of a comment, Jim, that I hear so often from people in dealing with youngsters and so on. They'll say, boy, they're so bright, or they're so sophisticated, or they understand so much more than we understood, or they know so much more about the world than we did. That is a really common comment to hear from people.
Isn't that streetwise, though? Isn't that what they're always talking about?
You know, that's what I'm wondering. What does that mean? I think you hear it in terms of maybe their knowledge of astronomy today, or the space program, or that surprise them, or adults will watch them work with computers and say, geez, they have a lot more aptitude for these computers than I would have. Or maybe it's picking up from television certain world personalities, or knowing the latest maybe from the world of entertainment in a way that a rural Ohioan didn't know 25 years ago or something. I mean, I really don't know. I'm just raising the question, but you certainly hear that a lot. People will say, boy, these youngsters are bright, or they know so much more. Even on the talk shows, it's common for people coming on Johnny Carson who visit the academic scene. It's almost a cliched phrase to say, boy, those young people are really bright today, or they really keep you on your toes, or boy, isn't that exciting to be with those bright college students, and so on. You hear that line of thought over and over. I just throw out something. I mean, surely television is a major part of this whole revolution that we're in, and maybe there's a way in which young people know things in terms of images or the kind of messages that television gives, but are not able to verbalize it or articulate it. Or that because they can deal with computers, they can't do simple math problems the way their previous generation could do it. In other words, maybe it's a different type of talent or skill that's being developed today. And I'm sure this isn't any kind of original idea. I mean, I'm sure people are batting that around in this whole debate. But is that possible here, that what we've lost is some of the verbal skills, the print skills, the ability to read? And certainly we know that is, I mean, any of us who teach in the university and have to read papers that students write, I mean, I think that the average person outside the academic world would be appalled if they could read some of those papers in an average class. Not in my class, because I got those wonderful honors students from your program this year, but in the average class, I mean, the quality of writing is just unbelievably bad in form of sense of sentence structure, punctuation, or anything like that.
Do you find that universally true in an average class?
I have found that in the past, I think, yeah.
I read an interesting essay some time ago that looked at students today in terms of students in the past, and its point was that you needed to know, in order to succeed in school and become an educated person, you needed to have developed two kinds of abilities. One was to use to be able to incorporate, ingest facts, to accumulate facts, not necessarily to use them. I used the wrong verb there. And the other skill that one needed was to be able to think logically, to synthesize, to evaluate, to hypothesize. And this essay went on to give two very interesting names to those attributes. One name that it gave was to bull, in that usual way that we mean that. Oh, he's just bullying. We say a student does, and students do that a lot. The other word that they coined, they made a verb out of a noun, was to cow. And the person who knows how to cow is the person who can take in all of this factual material, memorize and regurgitate, but doesn't really understand, doesn't know how to use the facts, doesn't know how to synthesize, evaluate, judge, hypothesize. Well, the reason I brought up this essay is because it seems to me that successful students need to know how to do both kinds of things. And today I'm finding that students can do one or the other. They can come into class and bull their way through an exam without ever having looked at the material, if the exam doesn't demand that they use facts. Then there's the other kind of student who comes into class and who has memorized the textbook but doesn't know what it means, doesn't know how to use it, doesn't know how to make it significant in his or her life. And I don't know why that separation has taken place, but I see it happening over and over again among the students I work with and in students in general. And
so you were trying to figure out how we could put those two skills together again, or get students to be able to operate in both those ways.
Yeah.
Well, it's It is a very discouraging scene as you talk about the university setup. I mean, many times in class people are really doing remedial things and can't count on a body of knowledge or skills that have been acquired. And even reading, I mean, that probably epitomizes the problem, doesn't it? The way you were saying before, that many people couldn't read at normal levels.
Yeah, there are 23 million Americans who are functionally illiterate. 23 million Americans in
who are functionally
in the 20th
illiterate.
century.
Yeah, that is, it's quite amazing, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, I often think in terms, again, of my own interest in theology and religious studies and so on. One of my favorite phrases is that we're producing a whole generation of people who are religiously illiterate, and people who don't know the fundamentals of the religious tradition in which they grew up in, can't talk about it. I find very often my students were upset with that fact, whether they came from Protestant or Catholic backgrounds, that they would be upset with the fact that they didn't know things about their religious heritage, that the fundamental ideas, the shaping stories of the tradition, the symbols and so on, the biblical material, that they simply didn't know it. They were prepared to admit that, but the interesting thing was they're angry about it. Like, why didn't someone teach me that? All we did was have discussion and make collages, as somebody said, and here we are in this situation where we don't know anything. And it was the anger that interested me. And I wonder if, well, sometimes you see on television these days these people, athletes and so on, who are upset with their university training because they were gotten through, taking easy courses and so on, and come to the end of their university career and don't know how to read, don't know the simplest things, and they often are angry with their universities as a result also. So maybe there's a desire to learn, and somehow we're not meeting that. One of the things I used to ask my students who were angry about it, I said, now suppose someone had really tried to teach you something in your junior and senior year, you know, real solid content, good theology and so on, good biblical material. Would you have liked it or not? Would you have taken it? You know, would you have been willing to do the work? You get sort of mixed answers to that.
What do they say?
Well, some you get mixed answers. Some will say clear yes, I was ready. Others will say, you know, probably if someone tried to push me at that time, I probably wouldn't have liked it. You get that kind of honest answer back too.
That's interesting. I guess I'm of the feeling today, and I just hit 50. I'm of the feeling today, in my middle years, that so what if you don't like it? You have to have it. I remember when I was a freshman student at Columbia, and went into classes, and I hadn't been prepared for them by my high school education. I was angry then that I had, and I would say to myself, why didn't somebody make me do this in high school? I know I didn't want to do it, and I wouldn't have wanted to do it, and I don't want to do it today. But somebody needs to really make that happen.
Right. I remember that experience when I was in New York studying, after finishing 4 years of graduate school in theology, going into further theological work, walking in the classroom and getting the syllabus and not having read any of the books on that syllabus, and thinking to myself, being angry over 4 years of graduate education in theology where we hadn't learned any of those kinds of things. The fundamental works, the great books connected with the field, that made me angry at the time, and it just highlights the problem all the way along the line. I guess I'm often back to that idea that there is a body of knowledge, an accumulated wisdom that an educated person needs to know to move on in life, so that we're not dealing with life in a vacuum. And not just head knowledge, but the kind of wisdom one needs to deal with life, to sort out truth, to be able to think in logical patterns, and to have this body of knowledge to draw on in order to sort out and make sense out of our own experience. I think that is part of what I think of as, you know, as a response to all of this. That Jim, we've been highlighting problem. We got to talk here about the answers, you know, and I'm starting to get into that. Solution. I mean, you got to know something. Again, I'm back in my own field of theology. I've always, all the way through the 60s and 70s, I've always been saying this: the classroom is a place in religious studies for teaching, for learning, for academically sound activity, for objective kind of teaching, so that there is a body of knowledge knowledge, a content that people are supposed to know about the religious traditions. And in a sense, I'm with you. I don't care if they really want to know it or not. It's not just playing games. You do have to know something. And I think we swung way away from that in so many educational circles.
Yeah, I'm sure that was one of the results of the loosening up of the 60s and 70s. And that was a necessary thing to happen at the time. But in many ways, this has been said so often that it's trite, but in many ways that degree of freedom that was offered to people then was more than they knew how to use. And I guess I believe today that things have to be tightened up, and that the expectations have to be made of students, requirements have to be made of them, or they as individual human beings will suffer, and the society as a collective body will suffer. So that's one of the most important things that I think has to be changed. And incidentally, one of the recommendations that comes out of this report, that expectations have to be made of students that have not been made in the past.
Really, solid thing. And part of that is that there's a certain content that they have to master.
Yeah, there's they recommend a new kind of curriculum, as a result of this study. I'll tell you just briefly what's in it. There are 4 years of English, 3 years of mathematics, 3 years of science, 3 years of social studies, and a half of a year of computer science. Well, that's just minimal.
Yes.
I would like to see students have 4 years.
In other words,
of
everyone coming out of a high school in the United States would have had that kind of material. Am I right?
Yes.
That's a recommendation for all high schools.
Absolutely necessary to graduate
in
from
the United
high school.
States. Yeah. Jim, can I go to another side of this? I'm flashing on Jesse Jackson's message that I think that where he's always asking the parents to get involved in the educational process and asking the students to do so much homework at home. You know, he has that whole idea of saying that, I don't remember the exact numbers, but that parents got to help their students, and the television's got to be off for a period of time at night. Students got to be wrestling with that material and dealing with the books. And I have to think that that's an important part of making progress on this whole thing.
It absolutely is. One of the findings that this commission came up with, which I found was astounding, was that the amount of homework for high school seniors has decreased enormously in the last decade. 2/3 of students tested in this study report less than 1 hour of homework a night required. And at the same time that has happened, grades have risen as student achievement has been declining.
Yeah.
It's a very
we call that
odd
grade inflation in the academic world, right? And that the grades keep getting higher because somehow the standards that we use to make judgments about students' work have been lowered, I guess.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and that's so the homework is important, and the parents' involvement and all that. And it seems to me that starts very early in the grade school, and expecting that kind of cooperation from the parents. And of course, you and I know the parents who have had good educations and who want their kids to get into the elite schools and send them to the best high schools and so on. You know, they have these tremendous standards. It probably accounts for that 2 or 3% you're talking about that whose SAT scores have gone way up.
That's right.
I mean, they're really pushing in there. They're working like crazy, almost killing themselves in the high school years to get the high grades to make it into the most prestigious schools.
But that's what they should be doing, I've come to believe. They have young, supple minds that are thirsting for that kind of knowledge and development. They maybe don't know that, but they are, and that's what they should be doing. I should say something on behalf of the parents, because I think they're not always completely to blame. Everybody likes to lay everything on the parents,
surely,
but I think the school systems are often to blame. What's the parent to do when his kid comes home from school and really doesn't have more than an hour of homework to do that night?
Right, and got all A's last quarter.
So what's the parent to do? He supervises that hour of homework, but he can't do anything more than that, except demand from the school system more from students in general.
Jim, did we exhaust the major recommendations of this study of what we need to do? So, I mean, the way I've got it so far is that there's got to be this content and courses that they have to take and so on, and they also have to do more homework. These are some of the suggestions I know that come forth. Are there any other ones that we should latch on to here?
Content is certainly part of it.
Yeah.
Standards and expectations is another part of it.
Uh-huh.
Requiring that the student actually spend more time in school and more time doing homework is a third part
more
of it.
time actually in school. Yeah.
More time in school and more time
I think a lot of parents would be happy to hear that one.
And then the teaching has to be improved somehow or other.
Yeah, as you said, let's not put all this on the parents. I didn't mean to really slant it that way. Obviously, what the teacher preparation has to be improved, I suppose, especially in the math and science area where we would have more good teachers available and so on. And the whole, maybe the requirements of the school. We probably have to get rid of the grade inflation and start to mark students realistically. And maybe, I know at the university keeps saying, hey, if the people write a sloppy paper for you, you have to critique them on it. And you have to somehow show them that there are higher standards here of writing proper English and so on. Jim, we're going to run out of time here. You got a last thought? You got 10 seconds, 20 seconds that you want to throw in it. If not, we'll
we as a society have to put some money into this if we want to accomplish it. That's the last recommendation from the Commission.
Let's build one less weapon system and put the money into the education. I'll get the plug for peace in there. Well, we've been talking about excellence in education. The situation is grim in many ways, appalling to some people, alarming to others, but there do seem to be things to do about it. We got the resources and the culture. There's no reason why we can't work at it and improve the quality of education.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Dr. James Larson, director of the Honors Program at the University of Toledo. The topic of this week's Reflections was excellence in education. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.